Alright, so let's talk about macro in this video. This is going to be a longer one. Macro is a very important topic. It's quite in-depth, and honestly, I don't think I'm going to be able to cover everything about macro in this video. There's just so much to it. But I'll try my best. We'll cover as much as we can in this video. But there's a few main points that I want to go over in regards to macro, and I think most of the macro shit you can throw out the window and you don't need to worry about using it. But there is a few really important concepts to understand, which is what we're going to focus on in this video. So what is macro? What do I mean? Well, macro is basically like, there's like two words, right? Macro and micro. Macro is like zoomed out, and micro is like zoomed in. So, microscopic, for example, is about looking at things at a very, very, very close up level. Microscopic, it's looking under a microscope. Macroscopic would be like looking at the planet, right? So macro is about the data and the information that we have on global political and economic changes, which we, in this at least example, we use to dictate investment decisions. So when we look at macro, we're basically looking at mostly this data, okay? Now, obviously, you might want to factor in war, famine, bankruptcies, different economic events and political events. But in terms of what I have found as being the most important to look at, these 6 pieces of data are the most important. So I want to go through and show you what they look like one by one, because you probably don't know what most of these are. So US interest rates, let's start here. So in the United States, if you would like to borrow money, it costs money to borrow money, at least now, right? During fucking COVID, right, they dropped interest rates to 0. So it meant that if you wanted to borrow money, it didn't cost anything. You could borrow for free, almost, right? Pretty much almost. In some countries, you got paid to borrow money. Now you can see interest rates have gone up a lot. They've currently gone up to 5%, and they're just going sideways. Okay? Why is this data important? Well, when it is expensive to borrow money, people borrow less money. When there's less money that people borrow, there's less leverage in the system. When there's less leverage in the system, people pay not as high a price for things. When people don't pay as much for things, the demand is lower. When the demand is lower, the price is lower. When the price is lower, they've gone down. So for example, let's talk about in the real estate sense, right? When you go and you buy a house, you tend to get a mortgage. You put in, let's say, a 10% deposit, $100,000. They give you another $900,000. You can now buy $1 million house. In countries where you are allowed to borrow money to get a mortgage, right? The prices of real estate is a lot higher than countries where you can't, right? The reason this is because when you can borrow money, you effectively have 10 times more money to buy things with. So let's say you've only got $100,000 and you can't borrow money. The house you're going to get is very, very shit. If you can borrow 10 times your money and just pay it back over time, you're willing to get a more expensive house. You're willing to pay more money, and thus the price of houses goes up. So the interest rate dictates the amount of leverage and risk, I guess, people are willing to take, the amount of money people are willing to spend on certain things in the economy. So they raise interest rates when they want to slow the economy down, and they lower interest rates when they want to provide support for the economy. Now, what happened here? Well, they dropped interest rates from 2.4 to basically 0 because this little gray box here was COVID, right? When COVID happened, people were locked in their house. They didn't want to spend money. They were, saving money. They're being frugal. Like times are getting tough. The economy might collapse. They were like, fuck it, we're dropping interest rates. We need to increase people. We need to make sure that people are able to, bid these assets to make sure they don't collapse in a certain sense, right? It provides support for the economy, right? And maybe the interest rates, the actual effect of them is only one variable. Another variable would be the perception from investors, from people who hold assets, of what it means when the Federal Reserve drops interest rates. So the Federal Reserve during COVID dropped interest rates to 0. Investors now go, okay, well, the government's really trying hard to not collapse the world economy. I'm just going to hold my investment. Whereas if they kept interest rates high and the government didn't do anything, maybe everyone panics and freaks out. There's a big run on the banks. Everyone tries to bring their cash out. The banks run out of cash. Big economic collapse. That's what they want to avoid. And they do this through monetary and fiscal policy. One of the things they do is the interest rates. They move interest rates. Okay? And why have they put up interest rates? Well, basically, we had this big boom, biggest bull market in basically human history over the past, during COVID, and inflation went up. And the problem with inflation is, I'm not actually entirely sure of why high inflation is a very, very big problem, but I think one of the basic assumptions is that the spending power of everyone's money rapidly decreases. All this money that poor people have saved up ends up going to be worth not much. And it creates, I guess, in a certain degree, it creates wealth inequality. And there's a number of other reasons why high inflation is bad that are quite complex that I'm not going to get into because I don't fully understand them. But basically, the Federal Reserve wants inflation at 2% a year, at least in the US, right? They want 2% a year, and they will use monetary and fiscal policy and Fed speak, which we'll get into soon, in order to, make the inflation lower or make the inflation higher, right? Inflation goes down if everyone stops spending money. So that's why they've dropped interest rates. They need to keep the inflation at the target. The Federal Reserve does a pretty shit job of keeping everything on target. But anyway, that's a topic for another day. So why did they raise interest rates? Well, inflation went rampant. Let me show you the inflation, right? In December 2020, so 6 months after COVID, roughly 9 months after COVID, inflation was 1.4%. On target, no problems, until we get to March 2021. And then inflation gets all the way up to 9%. 9% is fucking really, really bad. And so the governments were like, holy shit, okay, well, we need to raise interest rates, make money more expensive to borrow so that people spend less, so that because they're spending less, the cost of goods goes down as there's less demand, there's the same supply. This will lower inflation. And it has. You can see inflation's gone down because they have raised interest rates. Okay, and we're going to get into how this relates to crypto once we've gone over all of this. So US, QE, and QT. So the Federal Reserve has a balance sheet, right? This is what the Federal Reserve has, right? This is its assets, and I guess liabilities. But let's just talk about the assets, right? They hold things. Now, the government, if it wants to provide support for the economy, will hold more things. It will just add to the balance sheet, right? It will buy things, adding demand to the economy. It will bid things. It will have a larger balance sheet. If the Federal Reserve wants to, maybe pull the economy back, they're going to reduce the size of their balance sheet. So they're going to start selling things, right? When they sell things, that increases that increases the supply. It has that effect on the economy that makes it slow down. Okay, so that's another factor. You want to look at, is the government increasing the size of their balance sheet or decreasing it? And this relates into quantitative easing and quantitative tightening. Number 3 is Fed speak. This one's a little bit more airy-fairy arbitrary, but basically the Federal Reserve has a number of meetings every month where they sit down in front of a camera and they get asked questions and they talk about the economy and they say what they're going to do. And the Fed speak notion is basically, it's a word that has arisen from the fact that people in financial markets, they place a heavy value on the statements made by the Federal Reserve governors. So basically, this is how it plays out. Federal Reserve guy says, we are seeing that the economy is starting to enter maybe a potential recession, and so we are considering lowering interest rates next year 3 times, and we're preparing for a potential recession. So what they are basically doing, the Federal Reserve, is saying things to the world audience in a certain way to guide them to make certain decisions, to guide the economy. If they want people to spend less, they will guide people to spend less. If they want people to take on more risk, to spend more. If they think the economy needs a boost, they will speak in a way that's going to provide that support, right? And they have what's called Fed speak. The Fed will speak in a certain way to guide the market in a certain direction. Because, for example, 9% inflation, if they were to just put interest rates straight away to 10%, the economy would have what's called a hard landing, where everything would basically just fucking it'd nuke down, crash, and then we'd find a bottom. The Federal Reserve, people around the world do not want that volatility. They want a nice, smooth landing, right? Imagine you got a plane, you want it to land, right? Inflation's 9%, you want to land it at 2. You don't just fucking crash it. You have to go slow and steady into the 2% target, right? And so they use Fed speak. They speak certain words in certain ways to make the economy do a certain thing, right? Don't be speaking too bearish about the economy, because if you do, boom. Don't raise interest rates too high, because if you do, boom. If you do it all perfectly, Fed speak, slow, nice, soft landing. That's at least what they want to do. Doesn't always play out that way. Now, the next tool that I like to use is global M2 money supply growth. So in my opinion, this is the most important one. So you can see here that there's the blue thing and the orange thing. Orange thing is the Bitcoin price from the past 10 years. And the blue thing is the basically the amount of growth of the money supply in these major economies. So the European Central Bank, the People's Bank of China, the Bank of Japan, and the Federal Reserve. So all these major banks print money, and the amount of growth of their money supply is shown on this chart. So you can see that basically during a bull run, there's a lot of money printing, money supply increasing. When there's a bear market, it's as the money, the amount of M2 growth is shrinking. And then when you have negative M2 growth, meaning that the money supply is decreasing, that tends to be the bottom, right? You can see the bottom for crypto basically happened when they were having a net decline in the M2 growth, right? So M2 was declining. And so you can see here the bull run starting to go up. Well, that's, supported by governments, banks around the world increasing the amount of money supply. Now, why is the money supply important? Well, think about it, right? Everything is dictated by supply and demand. If there's 5 people who have $10 each to buy orange juice, and there's only 2 cups of orange juice left, right? How much are we willing to spend, to get that orange juice? Only 2 of us is going to get it, 5 of us want it. Well, we all have $10 each. Maybe the price is whoever would be willing to spend $10 for the orange juice. But then what happens if you give each of these 10 people an extra $10? So now each person has $20, and what does the price of the juice go up or down, or does it stay the same? Well, these people have more money. They probably are willing to spend more of their money because they have more of it to buy something that they want. So they'd probably be willing to spend maybe $15 instead of 10. So that's a 50%, inflation, I guess. And that's, relates back to the money supply. When there's more money in the system that people have, when people have more money, they are willing to spend a higher price to acquire goods and services because they have more money. And that leads to inflation, and that leads to the decrease in the value of the money that they had in the first place. Okay? This is why you can't just print money and give everyone $1 million. Because if everyone has $1 million, how much are you willing to spend on a bottle of milk? Or on a burger? How much are you willing to spend if every person on the planet has $1 million? Well, okay, everyone would probably be willing to spend $50,000 on a burger, or maybe $10,000, $5,000 on a burger, because everyone is now a millionaire. The value of the millionaire is only valuable if basically no one is a millionaire, right? This is why money has to be distributed between mostly with rich people and the poor people not having much. Because if everyone had heaps of money, it suddenly is not heaps of money. And then basically everyone has, I guess you could have everyone with equal money, but you can't make everyone rich, okay? You can make everyone normal, but you can't make everyone wealthy, okay? And we've got 2 more. So US stock index price action. So let's look at, and also this is another chart to show you just quickly I guess this is showing you the amount of money. This is another tool related to the M2 money supply. So we just went over M2 growth. Similar tool here. You can see that this is a tool showing you liquidity. So I don't know exactly what these pairs are. Japan assets, Japan USD, China BBS, CNY USD. But anyway, you can see that this is more about global liquidity. As the liquidity reaches a peak, that's the peak for crypto. And it reached the bottom. That's pretty much the bottom for crypto. So you can see that crypto is a liquidity-driven asset class. Now, second last, stock index price action. So we go over this in this video, but crypto is driven in the macro sense from two things: the amount of risk sentiment that is prevalent in the market,